Good evening, everyone. It's Deborah Irene. It's Wednesday, April 8, 2020. And I wanted to read you another story. It's time for story time. You know, the last time that I went live and I read you the story that was primarily about my Aunt Lizzie's home, a house, a home, I remembered some other things in my writings about her, and I thought, why didn't I read that? Well, it dawned on me I have more than one chapter where I've talked about my Aunt Lizzie. And today I would like to read you a chapter out of my book, Someday I Will Write, that talks about her as well as my mother and some of my aunts. I want to say that I had to go out of the house today and I found this pink scarf. So this is what I wore to be safe when I had to go out today. And it made me think that, this is a time I'm not leaving the house very much at all. We are not having much contact with people. And I'm sure like you're doing what I am and trying to stay in touch as much as we can with social media and messaging. But I'm going to challenge you today when I read this story to you that maybe you just need to sit down and write someone you love a little note, the old-fashioned way. This is again from the section of my book called A Time to Remember. It is chapter 4, and I titled this The Tablet. It wasn't an iPad, Galaxy, Nexus, or ZenPad. In between household chores and taking care of 4 daughters, occasionally she took a break. She walked into the narrow galley kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, grabbed a tablet out of a drawer, and carried everything into the small dining room. She pulled out a chair and, with pen in hand, began her epistle. She dated them at the top, various months and years in the early 1960s, and then it was Dear Lizzie, Delta, Eunice, Wanda, Mildred, or Lorraine, some of her sisters and sisters-in-law in the faraway land of Missouri. Oh, I had been there to visit when I was a baby. There were pictures of us, Mother, Sister Vicky, and me at Uncle Marv and Aunt Wanda's Civil War era farmhouse. But I simply could not remember meeting these relatives. She wrote for 15 minutes or 20 minutes about what we were doing, how we were feeling, how other nearby family members were, in case they had not had time to write. Eleanor, Geneva, Clara, and Louise. Hi there, Patty. She could easily write 5 or 6 pages on the 6x9 ruled paper. Sometimes she finalized the letter, and sometimes she finished in the next day or two, then placed the folded pages in a small envelope with a 4-cent stamp, and entrusted these precious words to the mailman to ensure they were delivered 1,700 miles away. And hi, Karen. In a few weeks, she received an envelope in return. Many times, she, my mother, read the replies to me, which were written on the same type of tablet paper by her sisters. Mother says my writing reminds her of Aunt Lizzie, and that makes me smile. She says Aunt Lizzie had a beautiful penmanship and was very detailed in her writing. She painted pictures with words of her rural life, like what flowers and shrubs were in bloom in her yard at the time, pink peonies, red roses, yellow tulips and daffodils, or lilac bushes, or maybe she described the abundance from her garden that year and how big Uncle Hike's watermelons were. In other seasons, it might have been how deep the snow was. And like Mother, she reported in on the entire family. The first time that I can remember meeting Aunt Lizzie was when she came to California to visit her daughter, who owned a restaurant in town. I was at the restaurant waiting for my mother's shift to end, sitting at the snack bar. She walked in with several others, sat at a large round table, and called me over. She gently squeezed me at the waist and said, "Honey, do you know who I am?" I shook my head no. "I'm your Aunt Lizzie, your mother's oldest sister." I was awestruck. This lady was no longer words on a tablet, but a real live person. The tablet was useful for other things too. Grocery list, reminders, figuring a budget, and writing down recipes, like Aunt Clara's cobbler, which was famously renamed Clara's Clabbler because of the spelling error when Clara wrote it down for Mother on the tablet. More than 30 years later, when I wanted the family apple butter recipe, you guessed it, I wrote it down on a tablet. Yes, I had a tablet too, and needed the ruled pad to write straight. Even with the lines, I still managed to write crooked. Mother had to rewrite Clara's Clabbler when the original deteriorated with age and use. I opted to type the apple butter recipe a few years ago, but have placed both of these handwritten recipes in a protective sleeve for future generations to appreciate. I sure hope they do. We weren't the only ones who used a tablet. This past year, I came across a little treasure written in 1992 by my lifelong friend Cheryl, who died way too young at the age of 48, 12 years after penning the letter. I was so excited to find it, her very own words in her very own handwriting. It's like she was right there with me after all these years. I will keep it forever. The art of handwriting a personal note seems to be a thing of the past, so it pleases me when I receive one. The notes tell many stories beyond the words on the paper, if you have a bit of imagination. Last summer, I lost another close friend, Kathy, unexpectedly. When visiting her condo the week after she passed, I came across a thank you note from my sweet new daughter-in-law and surmised from the smudge on the note that Kathy must have been drinking her morning coffee when she read it. I then realized the art of a personal handwritten note is not totally lost. My faith was restored. What another treasure I had found, but how guilty I felt. Last Christmas, I had every intention of writing a note in a card to all of the generous people who came to the book signings for Helen's Heritage. I couldn't seem to find the time. I had every excuse under the sun, too busy, too stressed, overworked. No one really cares. Truth was, I didn't make the time. And so this one who calls herself a writer will do better, I promise. I haven't seen the tablet for a few years. I looked for one at the grocery store today. It took some digging, but I found one for $1.59. So little money, but oh, so much potential for brightening someone's day. Maybe, yes, maybe, someone will find a treasure from me someday. I want to read, as I usually do, a little bit about this story and when it was published. This was a blog, and a version of this blog, which was written in 2017, was published in the July 2017 issue of Country Extra magazine as Handwritten Treasures. The magazine editor expanded the story to feature my mother and the book I wrote for her, Helen's Heritage, her life stories. We were grateful for the exposure. And I would like to show you that right now because we have many stories about our family in my mother's book, Helen's Heritage, as well. And this was a really exciting thing when I contacted the magazine that had published several of my stories. I sent them the blog, and as you noticed, I titled the blog The Tablet. But after they read the story, they took excerpts out of it and then began asking me questions about my mother's book and about writing her story and about my friend Cheryl that I talked about and the letters we exchanged. And so they titled this Handwritten Treasures. You know, I never dreamed that we would get that kind of publicity for my mother's book, so I was really grateful for that. And so this is her book, Helen's Heritage, that has many family stories. And the story that I just read to you was one I wrote in 2017 in my book, Someday I Will Write. So today I would like to encourage you to sit down and write somebody a note. And I'm sure they would appreciate it. And you can keep your letters, while I bend down here and show you what I found. These were some of the treasures that I found. This was the letter that I found from my friend Cheryl. And the notes here that I made years before I wrote my mother's book. I have some family history written down on that. We have recipes here. This one happens to be one I found today that we were looking for a family recipe, cinnamon rolls, and I didn't think I had it, and then lo and behold, when I was trying to find the things that I was talking about in this story, there was the cinnamon roll recipe. My apple butter recipe is on a tablet here, as well as a copy of Clara's Clabbler that we really enjoy laughing about when we talk about that family recipe. So I would encourage you today, please sit down and write someone a note. It'll be a treasure to them, and it will make you feel like you've helped somebody else. Maybe you can brighten their day. And I want to tell you that I've got a couple of other stories I'm going to read about my family that I think you will enjoy. And so I'll be posting another video about that. And that will be from my book, Reflections, which is the first book that I wrote. So take care and be safe. And I hope to see you again soon.